Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, after last week's rant, this week I'm going to go into the analytical and talk once more about hero. And not just the concept of hero, but something very specific about heroes, about the concept of justice, partly how and why it plays out within the idea of a hero, and how it feeds into, especially today, the idea of a vigilante. And I concentrate more or less mostly on the idea of entertainment from the perspective of comic books, especially North American superhero comic books. And superhero comic books from North America are vigilantism. That's what it is. All of these characters, I don't care if it's Superman or Batman, they're vigilantes. You don't need to go to the Punisher. All of them are vigilantes. And the reason why I want to talk about this specifically right now is because I do believe you see and will continue to see a rise in, at the very least, an acceptance of the idea of vigilantism within Western societies right now. So I'm going to start by analyzing why specifically that is right now. That's going to take a little bit until moving back to the expression of a vigilante within entertainment. And of course, how this entire thing plays into the concept of hero. And I do mean the traditional concept of a hero. And speaking of that, if you want a comic book, a graphic novel that's based upon the traditional idea of a hero and good storytelling with some spectacular art, you're looking at some of the art for my graphic novels in the background. There are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. The first one, Thomas Valiant, is still available with the Valiant Heroes, which is still in demand on Indiegogo. And by the way, we are shipping that right now. So thank you for your patience if you ordered it. The other is a return to form for low fantasy, concentrating on the rugged individual idea of stories like Conan with my book, Crom the Destroyer. Again, all based upon the concept of a traditional hero. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. All right, so let's jump right into this and talk about why there is a rise in the idea of vigilantes right now, and why I believe this will continue for, probably at least 10 years. And I'll try to get through this with some speed. But let's go over a couple of things, just a couple of things from, well, not really world news, I'll say Western society news, just to show how under attack the idea of justice really is. Because, again, as I always say, according to Western civilization, for at least 3,000 years now, the idea of a hero is the idea of a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are 4 in number and of a very specific order. They are prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. And while prudence, which is correct decision making according to right reason, is considered the charioteer of all the virtues, the strongest of those virtues is justice. If prudence is the charioteer, justice is the lead horse, the one that sets the pace and makes sure, because the others are yoked to him, that he keeps everyone, all of the other virtues of fortitude and temperance, in line. But again, the idea of justice, the true idea of justice, which is to render everyone what is their due, is under attack in Western civilization right now from many corners. I want to just look at a new law that was passed within Scotland, and it just came out, I think it just went into effect last week, 2 weeks. Now, I'm sure you probably heard about this if you are in the circles that I run in or listen to videos like mine. My good friends over at the Lotus Eaters have covered this, but it's basically a hate speech law. It seems to be centered around the idea of protecting the T part of the alphabet soup people, but certainly can easily be expanded to cover any kind of hate speech. Now, a lot of people are talking about this new Scottish law, but not many people are concentrating on the reason why it actually exists. People are going back to proximate causes, not back to the root cause. And really, the root cause why this new law exists is to destroy the idea of justice. And how does it do that? It destroys the idea of due process and the idea of innocent until proven guilty. Because according to this new law, anyone at any time anonymously can make a complaint against any other individual for basically hurting their feelings, and this complaint will not only be taken seriously by the police, but it will show up as a black mark on your criminal record for the rest of your life. And again, that's just from an accusation. So the point is, this destroys due process and the idea of innocent until proven guilty, because if all it takes to put a black mark on your criminal record is an accusation, so an accusation is now guilt, and an accusation is supremely easy to obtain. All it takes is an anonymous phone call or an anonymous email from who knows where for this black mark to go on your record, and then again, that accusation, for all intents and purposes, becomes guilt. So basically, the police can do an end run around a reason for wanting to pick you up for something. Or let's say you're talking on social media about going to a conservative event of one kind or another. Well, they can prevent you from doing that. How? Why? Well, they can find a reason why. They can go and search your house. They can stop you. They can do whatever they want because you're already a person of interest to the police because you already have a black mark on your record. So again, de facto, what it does is it turns every individual into being guilty, and the only people that are considered innocent are the ones that have been declared so by the public authority. Oh, these people, this group of people, no, they're innocent. We have declared them to be innocent. Everyone else is de facto guilty. And again, this destroys the idea of due process. This destroys completely and utterly the idea of innocent until proven guilty. And at the heart is an attack on justice itself. Now, a couple of side notes to this. Number one, some people might say, well, it's just in Scotland. Who really cares about that small little country? It's not here. Well, the entire reason why this exists is because of the push of a globalist mindset. And according to a globalist mindset, you start off your laws that you want to impose upon the globe in a very small, controlled place. And then you, of course, expand it outwards to larger and larger areas. That's the whole process of globalization. Secondly, if you live in America, you say to yourself, well, I have God-given rights. All these other people, and by the way, I don't know if you know this, if you live in America, but really, nobody else in the world has God-given rights, has unalienable rights. But every other government is based upon the idea of the government grants you your rights, therefore the government can take them away from you. So, of course, this kind of end run of justice, where you're guilty until proven innocent, works very easy or much easier in societies where the government can take your rights away from you willy-nilly. But don't be so high and mighty in thinking, I have unalienable God-given rights here in America. That's never going to happen here. Why? Well, you can go back to, at the very least, the Clinton administration and certainly the Obama administration and look at the judges that they have appointed, the justices that they have appointed, to see what kind of mindset they hold about justice itself. And you will very quickly see that they have been trying, that is to say, the Democratic Party has been trying desperately over the last handful of decades to appoint as many justices as possible that want to change the idea of rights in America to government-given rights instead of God-given rights. They'll give lip service to the idea of God-given rights, but really, according to these justices that have been appointed, again, for decades now, they've been trying slowly but surely to change it to, no, your government-given rights are just that, given to you by the government. Therefore, we can take them away. So don't get so, again, high and mighty, thinking, yeah, here in America, our rights are safe. They're not. And they're not, of course, unless you're ready to fight for them, which will bring us back eventually to the idea of vigilantism, but we'll get there. Now let's look briefly for a second at a more amorphous attack on the idea of justice itself. Now, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know that the ideas that the quote-unquote progressive ideology push are based upon ideas of the marginalized. That is to say, people on the margins. But here's the thing. They're no longer called people on the margins. They're called the marginalized. Why? Because the marginalized is a subgroup of the victimized. And that's why you can't call them people on the margins anymore, because people on the margins might be there because they want to be there. No, you have to call them the marginalized because they're a subset of the victimized, and no one wants to be a victim voluntarily. Now you might say, these people want to be victims all over the place. No, they want to pretend that they're victims. They want to play the victim in order for them to get something. But they don't actually want to be a victim. They don't want to have zero control over what is actually happening to them in their lives. They want to play the card of victimhood in order to actually gain more control. And the point is, again, no one wants to be a victim. Why? Because being a victim means something happens to you against your will. That's why marginalized people are called marginalized people, because again, it contains within the word the idea that these people are not there voluntarily. This has been done to them. And there is another subset of victimization that usually goes along with the marginalized when these quote unquote progressive people talk about the marginalized. It's what? It's the institutionalized. Again, you see how that word contains within it a reference to the idea of victimhood, which is to say, the reason why these people are in institutions is because they were put there against their will, not that they went there voluntarily. But here's the thing. If you travel in quote unquote progressive circles, or at the very least delve into their ideas like I do, you'll know that there is a commonly used term that usually goes along with the marginalized and the institutionalized, and it's becoming more and more prevalent within day-to-day use, because within progressive circles, it is already widely within use. It's just starting to break into, I think, the terminology that most people are exposed to within everyday life. And what is that third thing? What is that trinity of victimhood? Well, again, first, it's the marginalized. Second, it's the institutionalized. And now it's the criminalized. And again, the use of the word is to tie the entire thing back to the idea of victimhood, which is to say that criminals are not in prison because they want to be there or because they actually did something to go there. No, they're victims. They're put there unjustly. That's contained within the entire vocabulary of the quote unquote progressive left. It's the fact that these criminalized people, they're criminalized. That is to say, they have unjustly been put into whatever prison or jail that they're in. And so it plays upon the idea that the criminals themselves are the victims. It's not the people that they robbed or assaulted or anything else. Those people, they're not the victims. No, the criminal themselves, they are the victims. And this is why you have within major American cities the ridiculous notion of getting rid of bail, or other notions of where when someone actually commits an actual crime, you just let them go because you don't want to criminalize them because they're the victims here. Or more to the point, when someone breaks the actual law of the land and crosses your border without permission, therefore making themselves a criminal. Well, no, they're criminalized. They're a victim here. And I'm sure I could come up with dozens of other examples. But the point is, you see, this idea, this notion that is inspired by the word itself of the criminalized, which again goes with the new trinity of victimhood for the left, which is the marginalized, the institutionalized, and the criminalized. Well, it's to attack the idea of justice itself. It's to say that the criminal is the victim and the victim is the criminal. Because, of course, if the victimized criminal actually attacked someone or stole their money, it's because they were provoked to do so by the other person that they stole from, by the other person that they assaulted. That person that got assaulted, that person that got their property stolen from them, well, it was just coming to them because they were pushing these poor people into an action against their will. Now, it's the against their will part that is very important to this entire thing, and I'll connect to what I have to say next. And again, I know it sounds like I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'll tie this all together with a neat little bow of vigilantes. Now, I want to give you a short little story, personal story, just to show you that, yes, I've been thinking about this for a long time now, but I was born and reared in a suburb right outside a major East Coast American city. And during the early 70s, my family fled from that place. Yes, we were a part of white flight. We moved to the country, and I've been a country boy ever since. But the question is, why? Why did we flee? Again, it was white flight. My parents got sick and tired of death threats, got tired of knowing that crime was going on all around them. And when one of my siblings got the ever-living hell beaten out of him, my mother decided, yeah, we're leaving now. But why did this admittedly low income, but still once nice suburb of a major American city become such a hellhole? And I have no qualms about calling it that because the literal nickname of the people from the city for this suburb became hell. Well, it became that for the very exact same reasons of what you see around you today. So here's the thing that most people don't realize. It's the fact that what we see going on around us today with immigration in America is not a unique situation. This happens within America every roughly 50 to 75 years. America throws open its borders, takes in massive waves of immigration, right up until the point where the justice system starts to buckle, and then they close the doors and use the next 50 to 75 years to assimilate all of those people in the melting pot of America. Now, I think this is going on within the rest of the world right now as well, but we're concentrating on America. What we see happening right now happened within the 60s and the 70s. This immigration was from people who were Spanish speaking at the time. If you go back to, I think it's the 30s, the 20s and the 30s, it happened then as well, where they took in Germans and Eastern Europeans, the Irish and Italians, which had come in smaller waves before that, and also Jewish people. Again, these are all waves of immigration that had never been allowed into the country before. And so again, they put this immense pressure on the justice system, and they have to close the borders and then assimilate these people. It happened before that. There was a wave of immigration of the Scottish, which is where I came from. But again, the whole point is these are immigrants, waves of immigration from places that had never been in American society before, and they must be assimilated. So at some point, you need to slam the doors and assimilate these people. Now, I want to get back to that in a minute, but let's look at the idea of a vigilante and the rise of the idea of a vigilante within the last time this happened. Again, within the 60s and the 70s, which for me is not only within memory, the 70s part anyways, but really shaped my entire life because we had to flee from outside of a city because the cities is where these immigrants that come in wave after wave usually end up accumulating and where the justice system starts to break down the first and the worst. Well, what happens when that justice system is pushed to its brink is that there is a rise in the idea of a vigilante as being an acceptable method of dealing with something. You want to know one of the reasons why Marvel Comics took off just at the specific time that it did, with the specific kinds of stories that it did, with superhero stories? Well, it's because these superheroes were vigilantes. You had comics before that, but the DC comics were hokey, campy stories about powered individuals. Yeah, they were sort of superheroes, but they weren't really nitty-gritty vigilantes. It took Marvel stepping in to say, no, that's exactly what we want to put out. These characters are vigilantes. They didn't want to call them that. They called them superheroes, but that's what they are. They exercise power to punish the guilty because the normal system no longer operates correctly. So the rise of Marvel Comics can be very much attached to this whole idea of a vigilante, inspired by these waves of immigration that, again, last time it happened before what we have right now was in the 60s and the 70s. Now, I'm going to concentrate on that period, but just briefly, while talking about comics, I would say that this prompted the rise of the American comic book to begin with, when you had the previous wave of immigration coming, which again was a product of the 20s and the 30s. That's why you have people like Jack Kirby talking so much about the gangs of New York that he had to deal with, and that's what inspired so many of his characters and the way that he draws and everything else. And of course, these comic books and superheroes at that time were inspired by Western stories. The Western American story is the story of the rugged individual, a guy with two fists and a gun who can go out there and take care of what needs to be taken care of because there is no law. But if you even take a cursory glance at the entertainment within the 60s and the 70s, and really even on into the 80s, or more importantly, if you remember those, then you can see patterns emerging from exactly what I'm talking about. Not only the rise of the American superhero within Marvel Comics, but just think back for a second. If you can remember back then, think about the early 80s and just how many television shows there were about private detectives. Is it a coincidence? No, it's the fact that you had to have people just outside of the actual law system to try and take care of problems. We can go back to the 70s, look at The resurgence of Western stories and really the rise of the spaghetti Western, which concentrated more on this guy, yes, definitely is a vigilante of some kind. But let's look at other franchises like Dirty Harry or Death Wish. You had these people which technically were part of the justice system. They technically were police, but they really didn't follow the police rules. Really, they were vigilantes. Or I don't know if you can remember this because very few people do, but I remember this quite distinctly. During the early 80s and late 70s, I guess too, people were disgusted by lawyers. For people who didn't live through this, trust me, you had to be there. But anytime someone said they were a lawyer during that time, you basically wrote them off as being a snake oil salesman that was trying to steal your money. And this permeated any kind of storytelling within the late 70s, early 80s. I honestly think it was the show LA Law that finally broke that idea that lawyers were shysters, that lawyers were part of the enemy that was just trying to pull you down. And then when that started to heal and the idea of a lawyer became not so disgusting to people, then you got shows like Law and Order, stuff like that. But again, the point of why lawyers were seen as being disgusting individuals at that time, mid to late 70s, early 80s, was because they were part of a legal system that did not work. Why? Because justice had been destroyed to such an extent that people no longer trusted the justice system fully. Why? Because of the wave of immigration that had come in that had pushed the justice system to its breaking point. And here's where I want to return for just a moment to that idea of the current wave of immigration and how I think that America right now has probably bitten off more than it can chew this time. Let's hope that I'm just looking at this from a perspective of being in the middle of it and not being able to see it clearly. But quite honestly, this is the first time that wave of immigration from places that had typically no standing, no history within American society previously have come from non-European places. Sure, there was waves of immigration from the Orient that occurred around the building of railroads and things like that, but that was really tightly controlled. This is really the first time that those waves of immigration have come from non-European sources. And that presents a very unique problem that has to do with justice. That problem is as follows. Western civilization is considered Western civilization because it broke off from the other civilizations within history, most notably around 3,000 years ago. But really, it was bubbling up for at least 1,000 years before that, slowly peeling itself off. And what is the distinction that is made within philosophy and history, wherein Western civilization went its own way? Well, it was the idea of justice and how they dealt with justice. Western civilization is supposed to have two parents. One is Athens, the other is Jerusalem, and both of them came to the same realization about the same time. Within the Greek society, it was with and is recorded in the piece of entertainment known as the Oresteia. They are the plays about the son of Agamemnon, whose name is Orestes. His father was killed by his mother and a man that she wanted to become king, who she was having an affair with. So they killed Agamemnon, and Orestes went and then revenged his father on his mother and this usurper by killing them. And according to the old laws, Orestes would then have to be killed because he killed his mother. And so he fled to the temple of Apollo and said, Apollo, hear my case. I did not kill my mother. I killed the person who killed my father. It was my intent to kill the person who killed my father, to execute justice, not to do the unjust thing of simply killing my mother. And Apollo ruled and said, yes, your intent matters. The same thing happened within Jerusalem with the whole story of Job. Everybody up until that point where, well, you're being punished, obviously, because you did something wrong. And Job entered into the minds of the people of that society. No, my intent also matters. And that idea of intent, again, developing roughly around the same time within these two parents of Western civilization, built a justice system after that where intent was very important. Whereas within other Middle Eastern societies, besides the one fostered by Jerusalem, even today, intent is still not viewed with any kind of serious action. It's, well, you did this thing, well, you get punished for it. It doesn't matter if you intended this or that for it. It doesn't matter your intent at all. No, you're a woman and you got violated. Well, You committed adultery, therefore you need to be punished. It doesn't matter what intent you had. And again, this ties in with the idea of the rugged individual. This ties in with the idea of rights itself. The idea that you have unalienable rights. Because why? Because you actually have access to the reality of justice as an individual. And oh, by the way, you look at Oriental societies, they had no concept of rights until they were forced to accept them in order to enter into the League of Nations. So that's 1/4 of a way into the 1900s. And in effect, what it had produced within these societies, again, was a society not only that didn't have a concept of rights, but wherein intent, once again, was dealt with in a completely different way. That's why Western civilization is Western civilization to some extent. It's because of the idea of justice that is incorporating, to a large extent, your intent. Why? Because we believe in rights. We believe that there is an access to justice that each individual has, just by virtue of being a human being. And that's why, when push comes to shove, the idea of a vigilante does not become the distasteful thing that most people see it as. It becomes an inevitable outcome of, I have to protect my rights. If this is what it takes, this is what it takes. And yeah, as an individual, since I have access to the idea, the true idea of justice, then yes, I can do this. I might get punished by the powers that be, but I am still in the right. I might be found guilty by the corrupt justice system around me, but I will not be found guilty by my conscience. But again, just to take one step back, it's not just this wave of immigration that has done this. Again, as I said, these waves of immigration always test the justice system and push them to their brink before the doors are closed and these people need to be assimilated. Right now, I think that is going to be supremely hard because, again, you're bringing in massive amounts of people who don't accept the fundamental basis of justice in Western civilization to begin with. And one just brief example of this entire thing, how it plays out, I won't go into the entire connections of it, but the idea that people, let's say from certain areas of the world, can put their hand on what they consider the holiest book in their entire canon and then lie falsely and think to themselves, I can do this because I've been taught that it's okay as long as I serve the greater purpose to put my hand on this book and completely lie. That is 100% attacking one of the fundamental parts of the American, and not just American, Western civilization justice playbook, which is the idea of an oath. Trust me, as someone who has worked, tangentially anyways, with law for over 20 years, yeah, the oath is one of the fundamental building blocks of the entire system that we live in. You do your taxes, you sign an oath at the bottom. You buy a piece of property, you go to mortgage your property, you sign an oath in that document. You go to court, you put your hand on the Bible, and you swear an oath. You want something extra from the government, go fill out all of these forms, and at the bottom, you put your signature, which is your oath that what you are stating is true. If you have people that fundamentally do not accept this principle, the entire concept of justice in Western civilization falls apart. But anyways, I'm getting into the weeds on this. But not to place blame squarely on one group or another, but you can see this happening within the waves of immigration before. This is why it tests the justice system. Why in the world were the Irish considered suspect for so long? And really, the Irish were considered suspect right up until the 90s. Why? Because they were such devout Catholics, which meant that they held fealty to another institution which rivaled the state itself. So they had ideas of justice that were considered not American. Why, when the Scottish wave of immigration came in, were they considered suspect? Why? Because they were so used to the clan system. The clan system says you take care of things internally. You take care of things according to your family. I suppose the exact same thing happened with the Italians as well. But no, it's not a family matter. It's a matter of justice. Therefore, you take it to the justice system if the justice system works properly. But the point is, again, these waves of immigration, they all come in and they had a less than stellar track record of, yes, we believe in a country where the law is supreme. Therefore, because their ideas of justice conflicted with the fundamental ideas of justice of America, then yes, the justice system started to buckle and you needed to slam close those doors and assimilate these people. So what? So that they become Americans. But again, the entire point of why I'm going over this entire thing is the idea of a vigilante. From Batman and Superman to Wyatt Earp and Billy the Kid to Dirty Harry and Magnum PI, the idea of a vigilante within American society is not as disgusting an idea as it is within the rest of the world. It's an idea that is reserved only for desperate times, but then when desperate times comes, desperate measures have to be taken. And since I have God given unalienable rights, I have access through that humanity and through those rights to the concept of justice as it actually exists within reality, then yeah, I'm going to do this thing. Yeah, I'm going to become a servant of justice because my conscience tells me the just thing must be done. And that's why you see entertainment around you and the society really around you today crumbling to the point of uselessness. Why? Because the idea that these quote unquote progressive people hold is an idea of social justice. And if you have an idea of social justice that's not based upon justice itself, because you can go back to Cicero talking about the common weal and call that social justice, but it's based upon the justice of the individual first. That is the fundamental basis. If you take out that fundamental basis of justice for the individual, rendering to every one what is their due, then no, social justice of any kind does not work. So these people want to take social justice and make it the only rule. And that destroys the idea of a hero on multiple levels within our entertainment, within our society. The reason why Spider-Man and his story took off when it did and how it did was partly because he was always fleeing from the police. In those original stories, the police were always on a manhunt for him. J. Jonah Jameson was always publishing stories about the vigilante that is Spider-Man and how he needed to be stopped. He was on the outs with the justice system over and over again. Why? Because at that time, the justice system wasn't working correctly, and he was working as a vigilante according to his conscience, prompted by justice itself, the virtue of justice. And that's why, in part, these Spider-Man stories that you have right now mean absolutely nothing. He's no longer on the outs with the justice system. He's a lauded hero of the progressive movement. J. Jonah Jameson is no longer his adversary, he is his friend. Or other superheroes like Superman. Superman no longer has a secret identity. He has revealed to the world that he is Clark Kent. Why? Because he no longer needs to keep that part of his life secret. Why? Because he's part of the system now. And let's not even get into the idea of the Punisher. That character has been completely wiped and trying to be memory hold from the entire Marvel canon. Why does this all happen? Why is this happening now? It's because the people, the quote unquote progressive people that write these stories, have a fundamentally different idea of justice. One that is not based upon reality, one that is not based upon your rights, unalienable rights that every human individual has. It's based upon we have the most power now, therefore we get to tell you what is right and what is wrong. And that is why you're going to continue to see the rise of acceptance in the idea of a vigilante. Now, I'm just talking entertainment, but there have been some hints of this starting to crack into normal society as well. If you've heard about these squatters that are taking over houses within New York and other eastern cities or suburbs of cities, and the police are actually on the side of the squatters saying to the actual owner, no, they have more rights to your property than you. Well, we have at least one news story where the owner of the property went to the police and the police said, we can't do anything. You're the one that's actually going to get arrested if you do anything. And then, since the justice system didn't work, a couple of guys showed up at the door of that house and said to the people who are squatting within it, yeah, we don't work for the police. We don't have any connection with the justice system. You're going to leave this house now or we're going to come back. What is that? Those are vigilantes. Now, it is my hope that I think should be guided by the kind of entertainment that is going to become more and more prevalent, that kind of vigilante is informed by the concept, the true concept of hero, the concept of serving the virtue of justice, rather than simply to become another form of, yeah, we're with the family. You're going to do what we say because we have power and we're going to hurt you. And that's why the concept of a hero is so supremely important in our society right now. Because you, as an individual, you're going to be let down by the justice system come sooner or later, if you already haven't. It's been stretched to the breaking point, and it's going to fail you. And instead of piling on and trying to destroy the entire system, which is exactly what your quote-unquote progressive ideologues want, you need to, as bizarre as it sounds, at the very least cling to the idea of a vigilante. The idea that an individual, through their conscience and their rights, by virtue of being a human being, has access to the concept of justice and can, by virtue of that virtue, see that justice is done. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels, stories about true, traditional heroes with spectacular art. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.